The wind didn't just blow at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in February, it carved. By 6 o'clock, the snow was thigh-deep around the hangars, whipped sideways into steel walls and windshield glass. Lights flickered in the command building like they were shivering too. Inside the maintenance bay, Ava Lorne pulled her gloves tighter and kept shoveling. She didn't talk much, and no one expected her to. A flight medic support tech wasn't known for making waves. She was 5'3", always braided her hair into 2 low ropes, and wore the same frayed field jacket even in -20. Her glasses fogged up constantly. People said she looked like she got lost on the way to a library. No one ever asked why she was always the first to the flight line, or why she knew where every tool was in the hangar, even the ones new guys couldn't find without asking twice. She checked the UH-60M every morning, starting with the pitot tube heaters, then moved to the hydraulic reservoir levels. She ran diagnostics like someone who didn't just memorize checklists but understood the reasons behind each one. Still, when a sergeant cracked a joke about her size or asked if she could even lift a med bag without help, she just smiled and nodded, then went right back to coiling cables or cleaning out litter kits, alone. At 7:12, she brushed frost off the pilot side canopy, even though no missions were scheduled. Her movements were clean, practiced, but not hurried. She took time to check the cabin O2 supplies, replaced expired med gloves, and noted down calibration discrepancies for the life support monitor on her clipboard. No one watched. No one needed to. That was the thing about Ava. She didn't wait to be told. In the chow hall, she sat at the far end, usually with a folded napkin in front of her. Most thought she was doodling or writing grocery lists. The truth sat in graphite, rotor disc diagrams, wind correction angles, ground effect sketches with notations too precise for guesses. Once, a lieutenant walked by and asked what she was drawing. She said it helped her think. He nodded, didn't press. She folded the napkin away. By 8:25, the maintenance crew had moved inside to warm up. Ava stayed. She double-checked the bleed air valves, then pulled the heater plug to test cold start integrity. Her fingertips turned red, then white, but her touch never shook. She cleaned the skid plates, wiped snow off the FLIR lens. No one told her to do any of it. It wasn't in her orders. Her shift technically started at 9 o'clock, but she'd already been working for 3 hours. The others called her early bird, medic ghost, snow mole. She didn't correct them. When one of the aviation techs asked why she always worked alone, she shrugged, said the quiet helped her think. She never said what she was thinking about. By 10:13, Ava was in the supply closet inventorying tourniquets and trauma shears. She organized the blood warmers by expiration date, adjusted the voltage regulator on a backup defib unit, and then walked out without a word. Outside, the snow started falling again, sharp and steady. She pulled her scarf up over her mouth and disappeared behind the hangar, just as the rotor wash from a Black Hawk echoed in the distance. No one noticed her watching. No one noticed she mouthed the sequence of startup lights in perfect order as the aircraft fired up. No one asked why she stood there for 7 minutes, lips moving silently, like she was flying it herself. That was fine. Ava didn't need them to ask. She knew what they saw. A quiet girl with a clipboard and a warm hat, good at fetching gear, careful with gloves, harmless. But they didn't see the way her eyes tracked each blade rotation, or how her left hand moved slightly, as if adjusting collective pitch. They didn't notice the details. But she did. And someday, the details might matter. Ava never touched the simulators when others were around. She waited until after 18 o'clock, when the trainees had logged out and the techs had shut off the lights. Then she'd quietly boot up the flight deck in Bay 3, adjust the T6 Texan 2 module, and sit in the left seat like she'd never left it. She never flew full sequences. She just ran emergency drills, partial engine failures, loss of tail rotor control, wind shear descent. She logged no hours, filed no reports, spoke to no one. The base had 6 medics assigned to support duty. Ava was the only one who requested access to archived maintenance logs. When asked, she said she was curious about failure points. Nobody followed up. Her locker held a battered spiral notebook filled with engine start cycles, torque margins, and autorotation glide slopes, broken down by terrain type. The diagrams weren't copied. They were freehand, accurate enough to pass an FAA check ride. At 12:35 one Tuesday, she walked into the avionics bay and fixed a misreading on the UH-60's nav system. No one had asked her to. The crew chief had been scratching his head for 2 hours. She swapped a single sensor pin, ran a test cycle, and reset the DAFIF, then walked away without explanation. The techs stared. One whispered that maybe she'd taken a ground school course once. They didn't know she'd passed every module of tactical avionics programming 3 years earlier. During shift changes, she often stood near the hydraulic trainers. The others thought she was killing time. In truth, she was watching the responses at different temps. At -10, fluid viscosity changed enough to impact pedal input. She adjusted her notes accordingly. Later, when the aircraft experienced yaw drift during a blizzard op, it was her notebook the engineers consulted. They never credited her. Someone once saw her at 5:45 inside an empty UH-60 cabin, cycling through the pre-mission checks. The rotors were still. The aircraft was cold. She moved with practiced efficiency, hands touching each switch and panel in correct sequence. She stopped before the battery switch. Saturday still. Then climbed out. To anyone else it looked like pretend. To Ava, it was a rehearsal. Her suture kit was always clean. Her trauma bag packed tighter than protocol required. She logged expired dressings a week early. The junior medic asked how she remembered all the lot numbers. She said it was easier than forgetting something important. He thought she was joking. She wasn't. When a wind shear incident brought down a civilian drone over the landing pad, Ava retrieved the wreckage. Inside were fragments of its flight data module. While others dismissed it, Ava reconstructed the path, plotted the shift, and quietly noted that the same conditions might affect rotary craft under certain crosswind thresholds. She didn't tell the flight officer. She folded the napkin she'd drawn it on and slid it into her pocket. One afternoon, a captain glanced over her shoulder in the break room and asked if the rotor diagram she was sketching was from training. She said no. He asked what it was. She said it was nothing, just an old habit. He shrugged and walked off. She flipped the page and kept drawing. It wasn't that she wanted attention. It was that she couldn't stop analyzing. Every noise, every vibration from the aircraft had a pattern. She memorized them, not to impress, but because in her mind flying was less about control sticks and more about harmony. Ava wasn't trying to be seen. She was trying to stay ready. She studied flight physics the way others scrolled social media. On Sundays, she sat near the fuel tanks and timed pressure release intervals to check for microleaks. She never logged it. She wasn't assigned to it. But she knew how a failing check valve sounded at 60 psi. It wasn't theory. It was survival. Everyone thought Ava was quiet because she was shy. What they didn't understand was that her silence wasn't fear. It was calculation. Every movement she made, every tool she used, every checklist she ran in her head was one more way to stay sharp, to be ready. Because maybe someday, someone would need her. Not to fetch bandages, not to sort IV tubes, but to fly. And when that day came, Ava Lorne didn't want permission. She wanted to be prepared. At 21:07, the base intercom crackled, loud enough to cut through wind and metal. Ava was in the hangar, standing beside the UH-60M with a de-icing spray bottle in one hand. Her gloves were off. She'd been checking the skid mounts, lost in a rhythm only she seemed to understand, but the sound of the radio changed everything. The voice was clipped, urgent, not meant for broadcast outside command channels. A medevac ambulance had lost traction on a snow-covered road 30 miles east of base. It had rolled down a shallow ravine, flipped, and partially buried itself under drift and brush. 4 soldiers were inside. 2 were critical. Ground teams couldn't reach them. The storm had escalated to whiteout. Visibility had dropped below 30 feet. Every available rescue crew was grounded or diverted. The nearest helicopter crew was stuck upstate in Fairbanks, their birds iced in. Estimated delay was 3 hours. In the hangar, Ava froze. The UH-60 was prepped for training flights. It wasn't slated for a real mission. But she had seen the battery status earlier. The fuel tanks were topped off. The emergency medkits were loaded. She walked toward the aircraft, hand brushing the tail boom like it could speak to her. The wind screamed across the roof panels. It sounded like pressure building up before a break. At 21:11, the emergency command net confirmed an extraction request had been escalated to red priority. Still, no pilot was available. The operations center was scrambling to find someone cleared to fly under those conditions. The snow was falling sideways now, ice crystals bouncing off metal like sandpaper. The radio clicked again. The voice this time was low, tense. There were only 20 minutes left before one of the injured went into irreversible shock. Ava's breath fogged the inside of her glasses. She pulled her scarf tighter, stepped inside the maintenance bay, and closed the logbook she'd been updating. Her boots echoed down the corridor toward the side office where the maintenance chief kept his comm set on standby. The screen was still lit. She didn't sit. She listened. Every word from the command net felt heavier than the last. Fuel calculations. Ground team ETA. No rotorcraft available. No visual support. It wasn't just a bad storm. It was isolation. She turned her head slowly toward the UH-60's cockpit. The storm light flickered off the glass like the machine was waiting. At 21:17, a junior warrant officer at command asked if a fixed wing could overfly for visual aid. The answer came back fast. Negative. Crosswinds made it suicidal. The aircraft bay felt colder now. Ava didn't shiver. She reached into her left pocket and pulled out a folded paper and older checklist she kept for herself. Cold weather startup. One she had memorized years ago. Outside, the blizzard was swallowing the edges of the flight line. The only movement came from snow pushed by wind across concrete. A slow drift that made everything look still. But inside the hangar, Ava had already started walking. Not rushed, not panicked, measured. Someone was going to die in less than 20 minutes if no one acted. And Ava Lorne was already moving. Not because she was cleared. Not because someone told her to. But because, deep down, she already knew what came next. At 21:19, Ava stepped into the operations center, her boots dripping meltwater onto the floor. The room was loud, radios overlapping, monitors flickering between maps and diagnostics. A dozen uniformed personnel clustered near the central screen. She didn't raise her voice. She waited until Major Grant looked up, face pinched from stress. Then she spoke. "I can fly the Black Hawk." The words hung there, too quiet for the noise they cut through. Someone in the back chuckled, half assuming she was joking. Grant didn't. He stared, then frowned. He told her she didn't have clearance, wasn't part of the current flight roster, and needed to step back before she made things worse. She didn't move. Ava adjusted her glasses, said nothing else, just turned, walked out of the room, and crossed the icy flight line toward the UH-60M parked near the maintenance bay. Her scarf flapped in the wind, snow sticking to her collar. Inside, the cockpit was dark. She climbed in. At 21:23, the startup code input lit up green. Her fingers moved across the panel with quiet confidence. She entered a flight activation sequence by memory, typed in a reserved code. The console chirped once. Engines spooled. Battery levels stabilized. The APU came online. Hydraulics primed. Outside the window, the first low thrum of rotors broke through the storm. "Inside ops," someone yelled. Grant rushed to the window. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Ava had bypassed the pre-flight lockouts and was already halfway through the cold weather ignition cycle. Another tech checked the flight terminal. The code she used hadn't been issued since 2016. No one else remembered it. Grant grabbed the radio. His voice cut sharp into her headset. "Abort startup now." "That's an order." Ava's reply was calm. "There are 4 soldiers bleeding out. You have no pilot. If I wait for permission, they die." Grant froze. The command room went silent. All they could do was watch the storm blur against the spinning blades. Ava wasn't asking anymore. She was flying. At 21:27, while the UH-60's blades gained speed outside, Major Grant turned to his second-in-command with a short command. "Pull everything we have on Ava Lorne. Not just the surface file. Go deeper." The man hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes later, a secured access panel flickered to life. What came up wasn't routine. The personnel file under Lorne A was thin at first glance. Basic entries. Assigned to medical support. Certified EMTB. Deployed once to Fort Sam, Houston. Nothing unusual. But one tab was locked under clearance above Grant's level. He paused, looked around, then keyed in a back-channel override. A few seconds passed. The screen shifted. Her original records didn't list her as a flight medic trainee. They listed her as a top candidate from initial flight screening. Class of 2014. Assigned to primary flight school in Corpus Christi. Trained on the T-6 Texan II. She had aced every instrument check, every sim evaluation, top 5 percentile in her cohort. Not just academically, but in stress flight scenarios. Grant leaned in. Her instructors had marked her as exceptional under pressure, showed early command traits. Was scheduled for transition to rotary wing at Fort Rucker, UH-60 pipeline. Her projected track was Special Operations Support. That alone would have made her stand out, but that's not what stopped her career. The next tab was marked Incident Report, Classified. Grant clicked in. What came up was a single page, heavily redacted. The year was 2016. The location was listed as Southeast Texas. A Category 4 hurricane had just made landfall. Lorne was off duty, awaiting reassignment. The report stated that, without formal clearance, she commandeered a training aircraft from a reserve hangar. It was an older model, UH-60L. She flew into a flood zone that local command had deemed inaccessible. Over 6 hours, she ran extraction solo. According to the debrief, she rescued 42 civilians, including 2 infants and 5 elderly evacuees. No injuries, no loss of airframe, no comm support. She landed at an improvised LZ outside a church, running low on fuel and visibility near zero. Every survivor was accounted for. But the final note in her file didn't mention the lives saved. It said, disobeyed direct order, compromised command authority, recommendation, terminate from flight track, transfer to non-critical assignment. Grant exhaled, sat back in his chair. The words hung there, dry and damning. No commendation, no medal, just silence. He turned to the comms officer. She was buried for saving people. They nodded. No further details were available. The mission was never logged in official stats. No one wanted to admit a trainee outperformed their command team. She embarrassed people who wore stars. Outside, the helicopter was in full power-up. Grant stood at the window, watching the red strobe blink through the snow. The girl they all ignored had memorized cold start procedures, understood wind limits and blade flex, knew how to override startup sequences used only in instructor-level emergency training. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't lucky. She'd just never been allowed to finish what she started. At 21:35, Grant picked up the phone, dialed a number 2 levels above his own clearance. When the colonel answered, Grant didn't waste time. Sir, what do you know about a former cadet named Ava Lorne? There was a pause. Then the colonel's voice dropped. She was the best natural pilot we ever saw. Why was she reassigned? She broke orders during a storm op in 2016, saved everyone, but made a general look bad. They erased her. Grant looked back at the helicopter. She's flying again. The colonel didn't answer at first, then said quietly, then maybe it's time we stop pretending she wasn't meant to. At 21:38, Major Grant stood at the edge of the flight line, headset pressed tight over his ears. The snow blurred his vision. Ice crusted on his collar. Inside the UH-60M, Ava was seated left, co-pilot side dark. No second officer. No crew chief, just her. She'd initiated the APU startup 10 minutes ago, and everything since had been textbook. Her voice came over the comms. Operations, this is Lorne, conducting pre-flight checklist, cold weather protocol, cabin heat nominal, engine anti-ice engaged. Fuel quantity 1,250 pounds, JP8 verified. Battery at 100, inlet bypass doors open. Grant didn't reply. He let her speak it out, let her prove it wasn't guesswork. At 21:40, she toggled the start switch to ENG-1, monitoring NG rise. Engine 1 spooled clean, stabilized at 63%, TGT normal, then ENG-2. Same process. Her hand moved smoothly from the power control lever to the collective friction knob, tightening for stabilization. Both engines lit clean. No hesitation. No overtemp. RPMR stayed locked at 100. Torque read 28% on both shafts. Hydraulic pressure stable. She flipped the switch for blade de-ice, then cycled windshield defog and bleed air. Her voice stayed calm, controlled, as she ran down each segment. Stabilator check complete. Caution panel clear. ICS working. Radios tuned to tower and ground. Barometric altimeter set. Magnetic heading synced. She hadn't missed a single item. Outside, visibility was still poor. Wind gusts held steady at 38 knots from the north-northeast. Whiteout index sat just below the safe minimum for unaided night flight. But the UH-60M was cleared for instrument flight, and Ava hadn't slipped once. Grant keyed his mic. Lorne, confirm mission profile. Her voice replied without hesitation. Extraction of 4 casualties at grid, 412, north by 674 east. Elevation, 2,200 feet, no NVG, relying on FLIR and acoustic echo mapping. Estimated on-site time, 12 minutes. Fuel for 1 hour, 35 minutes. Contingency abort to Southside LZ7, Bravo. At 21:44, she adjusted her shoulder harness, flipped the master caution reset, and engaged the GPS backup unit. Then she paused, waited. Grant knew what it meant. She wouldn't lift until someone gave her the go. He took one step forward, voice steady. Medevac 1, you are cleared for emergency departure. The rotors roared louder, pitch shifting as she advanced the power levers. The nose lifted. The skids parted from the concrete in perfect symmetry. No bounce, no drift. In less than 5 seconds, the UH-60M vanished into the snow. Grant lowered his radio. No one said a word. All they could do now was wait. At 21:47, Ava leveled the UH-60M at 200 feet AGL, nose pointed straight into the wind. The storm battered the fuselage from the left quarter. Side gusts hit 40 knots, forcing constant cyclic correction. Radar was blind. GPS bounced. She switched off the unreliable autopilot and flew full manual. No second pair of hands, just instincts and old memory. The FLIR picked up nothing but static. Ice was beginning to form on the leading edge of the main rotor. She toggled blade de-ice again, increased bleed air to windshield ducts, and pushed the collective slightly higher. Every movement was precise, no wasted energy, no overcorrection. By 21:50, she dropped altitude to 80 feet. Trees flashed below like ghost shadows through the murk. She flew low, riding the contours of terrain she couldn't fully see but remembered from simulations and rescue training long buried. Her eyes flicked between the vertical speed indicator, torque readout, and distant thermographic haze pulsing on the secondary screen. The blizzard thickened, wrapping the aircraft in white noise. When the UH-60 shook sideways from a wind shear blast, Ava didn't flinch. She shifted the pedals, rolled into the gust, and brought the nose back into alignment using coordinated tail rotor pressure. Her hands stayed loose, her breathing stayed calm. At 21:54, a faint thermal trace blinked to life. It pulsed irregularly, offset slightly north. She nudged the cyclic forward, corrected for drift, and trimmed for zero pitch. The signal strengthened. An overturned vehicle. Metal was reflecting heat from somewhere under the snowpack. She descended again, this time under 40 feet. Turbulence slammed the aircraft upward. She compensated instantly. Banked right. Adjusted descent angle. Snow blasted across the windshield, but she kept the FLIR centered on target. The terrain was uneven, sloped with no flat LZ. She didn't hesitate. Ava switched to a combat descent profile. At 21:57, she rolled the aircraft into a steep approach, 45-degree nose down. She compensated collective with pitch, managing blade stall risk with years of buried instinct. Touchdown would be risky. The slope would try to tip her. She lowered the skids at an angle, tapped the ground once, then let the tail settle, nose slightly up. No bounce, no tail strike. She powered down to flight idle. Reached back, pulled her gloves tight, grabbed the med bag, and unlocked the left cabin door. Snow rushed in. Visibility was near zero, but the target was there. People were alive. And now, she was on the ground. At 21:58, Ava jumped from the UH-60M, boots crunching into knee-deep snow. The wind sliced sideways, dragging ice crystals across her face, her glasses fogged. She wiped them once with the back of her glove and moved. The ambulance was overturned, partially buried, front end crumpled around a tree line. The rear doors were bent inward, barely hanging on the hinges. No sound came from inside. She didn't hesitate. She drew a rescue strap from her med bag, wrapped it around the rear axle, and anchored it to a tree trunk. Then she climbed onto the top of the vehicle and kicked once at the rear panel. The sheet metal groaned. Twice more. On the third, it cracked open. Steam poured out, mixed with smoke and freezing air. Inside, the heat pack lights still flickered red. That meant life. She slipped inside, crouched low. The first soldier was unconscious. Pale. Tachycardic. She checked pulse threading and fast. Neck exam showed signs of C-spine trauma. She stabilized his head with a soft cervical collar and immobilized with a rolled blanket. No time for a full board. She secured him in place and moved to the second. This one had a femoral bleed. tourniquet already slipped. She cinched it tighter, then opened an IV line in the right AC, flushed it fast, and attached a plasma unit from her field kit. Blood pressure was crashing. She activated her portable warmer, keyed to 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and ran the transfusion with gentle flow. Not too fast. Risk of overload. He groaned once, eyes fluttering. That was good. She checked airway patency. No obstruction. But breaths were shallow. She pulled a BVM from her pack, sealed it over his face, and started rescue ventilation-own breath every 5 seconds. Manual, steady, perfect seal. The third patient was alert but panicking. He had a broken humerus and suspected rib fractures. She calmed him with simple, even voice. Not loud, not rushed, just enough to keep him focused. She splinted the arm with a padded board and soft wrap, checked for lung sounds to rule out tension pneumo. Clear, no drop in saturation. She handed him a heat pack and moved to the fourth. This one was buried halfway in snow, halfway out the side panel. Compound tib-fib fracture. Shocky. Ava cut away the pants, flushed the wound with sterile saline, packed gauze, and applied a SAM splint. Then she drew up 10 cc morphine, administered intramuscular. Time of injection, 22:07. She radioed the base. 4 survivors, 2 critical, starting load now. Back at the UH-60, she pulled out the foldable sled, dragged the unconscious first soldier across snow, strapped him into the rescue rig, and hoisted with the manual winch. No help. No rope team. Just her and training. She repeated the process 3 more times. One by one they went into the cabin. She kept vitals running, switched IV bags mid-transfer. BVM continued by hand. Inside the bird she secured each down with crash restraints, monitored cap refill, maintained airway positions with folded gear as makeshift wedges. The fourth was still unresponsive. She did a sternal rub. No response. She hung another plasma unit and squeezed manually. By 22:16, the last strap clicked into place. Ava climbed into the pilot seat, rotated back through the checklist. Engine temp stable, torque green. She keyed the mic. Medevac 1, lifting with 4. Departing to base. She didn't mention the blood on her sleeves, or that her fingers were going numb, or that she hadn't stopped moving in 20 straight minutes. She just flew, controlled ascent, smooth turn, back through the storm. She didn't blink. Those soldiers had 20 minutes. Ava gave them 35. At 22:43, the UH-60M came back into view above Elmendorf-Richardson. A dozen soldiers stood outside the ops building, coats zipped to their chins, eyes squinting through the stormlight. The rotor wash hit the snow hard as Ava brought the aircraft in low, steady, direct, no drift, no hesitation. Just the soft hum of a bird coming home with something it wasn't supposed to carry 4 lives that should have been lost. The skids touched down like breath on glass. The storm still howled, but for a moment no one spoke. The medics were already running out, litters ready. Ava stepped down from the cabin and moved to the side door. Her sleeves were soaked, gloves stiff, hair half loose from the braid. Her glasses had cracked at one edge, but her hands didn't shake. She helped move each soldier out one at a time, calling out vitals, injuries, dosages, timestamps. Every word was sharp, controlled, focused. Major Grant stood beside the flight line. He didn't interrupt. Just watched her move. No flourish, no pride, just purpose. When the last soldier was loaded into the ground transport, Ava turned back to the bird, reached into the cockpit, and shut it down clean. No wasted power. Every switch flipped in perfect order. Then she stepped out, took off her headset, and nodded once toward Grant. "If you need to file charges, I'll understand." Grant didn't answer right away. He looked past her at the evac vehicles rolling toward the infirmary. Then, back to the bird. Then to Ava. Not tonight. At 23:10, he made the call. His report to the regional command was short and precise. Lorne executed an unauthorized flight, conducted solo rescue in Category 4 whiteout, extracted 4 critically injured personnel without loss, performed emergency medical procedures mid-flight, recovered all 4 patients in stable condition, aircraft returned in mission-ready state, pilot in full control throughout. By 2 o'clock, approval orders were transmitted back. Lorne, Ava, flight status reinstated. Immediate reassignment to Tactical Rescue Squadron under Joint Search and Recovery Group. commendation pending for extraordinary service under non-permissive conditions. When Grant told her, she didn't say anything, just nodded. She didn't ask about medals, or press, or where she'd be going. She just asked one thing: are there people who still need saving? Always. Then I'll pack light. At 6:30 the next morning, the snow had softened. Light broke gently over the ridge behind the motor pool, and for the first time in days, wind didn't scream across the flight line. The hangar lights flickered on one by one. Ava was already gone. She hadn't waited for the formal debrief or the commendation team flying in from command. She didn't attend the briefing where Grant read the reinstatement order to the squadron. Instead, she left her locker clean, her flight bag zipped, and a small weathered notebook placed on the center desk in the medic operations room. The cover was scratched, corners curled. Inside it held diagrams of rotor dynamics, emergency descent profiles, acoustic approach patterns, and handwritten notes on flight instinct. There were no dates, no signatures, no long explanations, just margin notes and equations, pages worn from use. On the final sheet, in quiet script, it read, "Don't judge pilots by the noise they make. Watch how they keep others alive in silence." The desk sergeant found it just before shift change. He opened it, read a few lines, then didn't speak for a long time. He placed it back gently, left it where others could see. By noon, the room was quiet again. No one moved the notebook. No one dared to claim it. Ava didn't take the upgraded jacket or the new patch with the rescue insignia. She left her old one folded on the back of her chair. Her name tag was still attached. No medals, no ceremony. She caught the early convoy headed west, seat behind the driver. Didn't look back. The base didn't make an announcement. But word spread fast. One by one, the younger medics stopped to glance at the book. One wrote down the quote. Another started using her layout for packing the trauma bag. No one said it out loud, but they all knew. Something important had moved through that hangar, and left it better. The notebook stayed on the medic ops desk for days. No one locked it up. No one labeled it. But people came. They flipped through it quietly, some just running a hand across the worn cover before walking away. The younger ones lingered longer, tracing flight paths sketched in pen, studying rotor management checklists she'd written without a guide. Each page felt like a quiet whisper from someone who never raised her voice. In the back corner of the room, a new recruit opened his journal and wrote a single line. She flew when no one else would. He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. Everyone who read the book understood exactly who he meant. A month later, a flight class began using one of Ava's cold start sequences as a teaching example. They didn't call it the Ava protocol. No one made a big deal. It just became something they did, passed from one pilot to the next, never officially written down but remembered all the same. At 7:42 on a gray Thursday, a UH-60 lifted from the pad at the far edge of the base. Snow flurried lightly. The crew chief said nothing. The pilot wore an older flight jacket, cuffs worn smooth, braid tucked behind her headset. She didn't speak as they cleared the tower. Just flew. There were no cameras, no brass on the ground. Just the hum of rotor blades cutting through silence. Another call had come. Another name on the list. She didn't need orders anymore. She just needed a reason. And somewhere beyond the ridgeline, Ava Lorne vanished into the sky again. No medals, no spotlight, just a quiet presence, doing what she'd always done. Showing the rest of them what courage really looked like when it didn't ask for permission.